it's Rob here and welcome to the fourth part of my build series on the Tamiya Avante 2011. I left off on build 3 on step 26, so now we're going to move on to the shocks. Steps 27, 28 and 29 are all to do with building the shocks. So I've got all the bits here ready to make one up for you, and the other three I've already made up. To complete this, we've got one off BC7, which is two off BC7, which is a 2mm E-clip. One off BH4, which is the rear piston rod. One off BS7, which is 2mm shaft guide. One off BT4, which is 3x0.2mm shim. One off BT5, which is a 3mm O-ring. And then the rear shock body, oops, it's not standing still, with both its end caps. And for step 28 we've got BT7 oil seal, and then for step 29 we've got BH2, which is a ball collar, PA11, which is the rear coil spring, and plastic parts we've got Q2, which is the spring holder. Forgot my words then. We've also got a spring tensioner, which I think in this case is Q3. I've decided I'm going to start with. And then for step 27 we've got Q1, which is the ball end, and we have Q7, which is the actual piston. And Tamiya show here to start off with the 3-hole piston, and also there's a little note there to tell you to remove the moulding lug. So I've done all of that, and the first step is to put the E-clip on the piston rod. Then after licking my finger we get the shim and put that over, then the piston, and then the tricky E-clip. Excuse me, bit of a frog in my throat, and dropping my pliers. We then get the piston body and slide the piston rod through, and then quite a lot of these piston kits with oil, it tells you to oil the rod before you put it in, but in this case it doesn't, so I'm not going to. You then take the BS7, the shaft guide, and insert that, and then the BT5, the orange O-ring, and slide that on, and then we can screw on the end cap. And what I've found here is there's a little note right at the bottom on here telling you to use this wrench, and it's the 8mm side you need. And I've found that if you don't do that and do it quite tight, then the shock leaks. But as you can see, it doesn't stop it from sliding up and down or give any resistance, other than you can feel a tiny bit from the O-ring. So don't miss that little thing that I did miss on the other three. And then the next step, we can screw in the Q1 ball end. And that completes step 27. Step 28 is actually filling it with oil, and for this particular kit Tamiya have sent along quite a large bottle of their medium damper oil, and down here we see here that according to this the blue oil is 600 weight, or CST is it? I forget now. So it's quite a... I've not had any blue before. We normally have the yellow, which is 400 in most other kits. So I tend to start with the piston right at the very bottom, and then moving very slowly I pump the piston up and down a few times to try and get any air out. I then leave it standing upright as much as possible for a few minutes. So I've got one of my wheels and we just leave it like that for a few minutes to let all the air escape. So we'll be back in a minute. I've left the piston to settle for a few minutes, and yep, all the air's gone. Now if you look at Tamiya's notes on this, what it tells you to do is once you've filled it up and got it to about that level, is to pull the piston all the way down before putting the oil seal in. And doing this, what tends to happen is once you've built it all, if you push the piston up, it forces it back down for no reason. So a friend told me about a different approach in doing this, and then I also saw it on another video, and that is to push the piston all the way up to the top and then put on the oil cap and then put the cap on. Now with these particular shocks, I'm possibly going to have an issue, because on the three that I've done so far I've not been able to screw the cap on with the oil seal in situ in the top here. What I've ended up having to do is put the oil seal inside the cap first. So what I'm going to do is just start it as normal and push the oil seal in so that it forces the oil out all over my fingers. But then I'm going to have to take it out and then put that to one side for a second, and then get the cap and insert it the right way in. And then we can start screwing it up. And then we should see to pull it out, and in fact it's even sucking it back up a bit, which I've never seen before, so we'll see how that goes. So that finishes step 28, and we'll move straight on to 29. 29 is just putting the spring onto the shock and then putting the spring collar on, he says. There we go, like so. And as I say, I'm going to use this medium-sized pre-tensioner for now, and that's it. And then we just got this ball collar to insert, which isn't as easy as it looks, because you can get it part way in. Oh, there we go, he says. It's always the same. If I say it's easy, I end up having problems, and if I say it's hard, it goes straight in. So that's the shock built. Step 30 is installing the rear shocks onto the chassis itself, and for this we're going to need two BA7s 3mm flange nuts, two BC7s 2mm E-clips, two BH6s which are bushing base, it says here, two BL7 which is 3x 15mm link pin, two BS6 which are 3x 1.5mm spacers, two BT6 which are rubber bushings. They're like O-rings but they've got flat edges, and two PB4 which are double bull shafts. And you can see, if you can pick them up, you've got a smaller ball joint and a larger one. And we start off on the chassis. And we get one of the shocks, and there's a little note here showing you that one of the openings at the top is slightly larger than the other, and you'll see if I try and put it in the smaller hole it doesn't go in properly. If I turn it round it slots all the way in, and that goes in. I've already put one of these bushings together, and that goes on next. Then we've got one of the spacers, it says, won't go in, yep. And finally one of the flange nuts, and it goes through there, it says, into the inner hole on the rear shock state. And we'll just do the same for the other side. And then it recommends you to spin it round to get these link pins in. Hooray! One that went straight in. Finishes step 30. We now have shocks. Not too bad. Step 31 is installing the front dampers onto the chassis and the wheel hubs. Very similar to the rear ones, but instead of a screw or a link pin, an E-clip on the bottom, we've got a ball joint already installed from previous steps. So we need two BA7s 3mm flange nuts, two BA6s bushing base, two BT6 which are rubber bushings, the two front springs PA12s, and 2 PB4 double ball shafts. Now, as you can see, I've already installed the top of the first one, and like so, and we'll start on the second one. And again, you'll notice that the ball joint will only go in one way, and then we've got the bushing, and then I'm going to slide it through there and then attach the ball joint first at the bottom. It's just a press fit, he says. There we go. And then we can turn it round. And just a word on this, my nut spinner won't fit because of this screw head here, and neither will the box spanner. And because the Tamiya spanners that they supply, I don't think that one will fit anyway. Oh yeah, it does. Are a bit rubbish really, aren't they? They're a bit thin. So I'm just going to use my long nose pliers. And that finishes step 31. Step 32 is installing the servo saver onto your servo. I've already completed this. I'm not showing it because of all the different variations depending on which servo you end up buying. But what you're going to need is one BJ3, which is a 5mm ball connector, one BS4, which is a 2mm lock nut, and then one of either of the following: BA3 3x10mm screw, BC5 2.6 by 10mm tapping screw, BJ1 3x10mm tapping screw, or BJ2 2.6 by 10mm. And I think for my particular servo, which is a Carnegie, I've ended up using the BA3 screw. The plastic parts you're going to need are a P1, which is a bush, P3, which is the steering horn, shall we say, P4, which is the servo saver itself, and then either a P5 or a P6, again depending on what servo you're using. I've got a metal geared one, and to be honest, I can't remember. I think it's the P5 I've had to use for the Futaba. And it's all installed ready, and the ball joint simply screws into the middle top hole of the steering horn, and I've centered it all up as best as I can, and that completes step 32. Step 33 is installing the servo and the ESC onto the chassis itself. For this we're going to need one BB5 3x10mm countersunk tapping screw, one BD5, which is 3x18mm threaded shaft, 3 BF3s 3x10mm flange tapping screw, and 2 BT1 5mm adjusters. And then also on the plastic side we need 2 E4, which are the servo mounts. Now, I've already installed the servo mounts, as you can see there. Really simple job with just the 2 flange screws ready to go on. And I've also made up the steering arm, and for this Tamiya are recommending you to start with an 11mm gap, and again it's an easy to do job. Both threads are right-handed, so you have to hold the one thread, hold the bar while you're threading one on, and again with the other arm. So that's all done, and then to finish off we need the chassis to screw the servo on. Just one thing there, they show that the servo wire goes up and through this hole here and is then kind of trapped in between the two servo mount posts. So don't forget to do that, otherwise I think it'll look a mess. Now I've already stuck the ESC on in about the position that I think it is, and I've routed the wire, the on-off switch wires, around this side to keep it away from the prop shaft. So the next step is to connect the motor up, and I don't know if you can see, but there's descriptions here on which wires to connect depending on what motor you've got, and generally it's always the yellow to yellow. And once that's done, we can then quickly put on the steering arm. Now this steering arm, this side of the steering arm, is a bit tricky because it doesn't slide in to this hole in the chassis until you've actually clipped it in place. So you have to bend the steering arm up slightly just to get it up, and once it's in, there's quite a nice gap. And that completes step 33. Step 34 is installing the radio receiver and positioning the ESC on-off switch, and unfortunately due to supply, I'm currently going to install one of the old AM receivers, so I'm also going to be installing the aerial post. For this we're going to need one BA4, which is 3 by 6 millimeter standard thread screw, and BJ6, which is the antenna post, and then some double-sided tape. Now there is a note here to say install ESC receiver so that they will not come in contact with the driver figure, to be attached at step 39. So just making you clear about that. This post here, if you can see, there is the screw hole for attaching the driver, and there's a locating hole so that it doesn't wobble about too much. So what we're going to do is, what they don't tell you is you also have to bear in mind the body shell. When I was trying this out, I installed my receiver this way round, somewhere here, and the top of the crystal and the wires from the servo and the ESC were all pressing against the top of the shell. So I'm going to install it, he says. Can never get the tape off. the on-off switch. What I've found with the on-off switches is, especially ones coming with the Tamiya TBLE, is they're really long, and you can see as you press it when it's really long that you're sort of twisting it. And a mate of mine's had one that's broke because of that, so I've basically cut the end off, made it smaller, filed it down a bit, and also with it being so long, it was sticking out so much that when I tried to switch it on with the body on, it was coming into contact with the body. So I'm going to position this so that it just doesn't touch, so it's just past the chassis. And that completes step 34, just a case of tidying these cables up. I've tidied up the cabling now and the wiring. Hopefully none of it will get caught up in the prop shaft. Again, it's just an initial tidying up. I may have to adjust things when I come to fit the driver and the body shell, but I'm kind of hoping that these servo wires will tuck underneath the driver out the way without causing too much of a problem. So we'll get on with the next step. Step 35 is installing the tyres onto the wheels. This includes these foam inserts to help a bit with the shock absorption. As you can probably see, I've already done 3, and we'll show you just how to do 1. Surprisingly, there's no part numbers on these, but hey, you can't really miss a yellow wheel, can you? So to get the foam in, you squeeze it together and pop it in and try and get it in the side walls of the tyres, and then just feed it round a bit. There will be a bit sticking out just due to the size, and then Tamiya recommend you push the tyre, the wheel even, into the centre like so, and then rotate the wheel trying to take as much care as possible not to trap the sponge. And there we go, he says. That's mostly on, part's on, yep. And there we go. And there we have 1 wheel. Now at the minute I'm not going to glue these, because I've found so far that most of the time with a Tamiya wheel and a Tamiya tyre for off-road use, I don't need to glue them. So if you don't need to, don't. But obviously we'll see after we've run it a few times. If the tyre starts to come off, then yeah, we'll get some glue on them. But that finishes step 35. Step 36 is installing, or shall I say assembling, the wheel caps. Now these are the things that hold the wheels on. It's got the standard, is it 5mm thread? But they've got cam locks, so you just screw it on, close the cam locks, and the cap won't come off again. And for this we're going to need 8 BE1s, which are 2 by 11mm screw pins as they call them. And in this case the screw pins, you can see there's only a thread, hopefully you can see. There's only a thread at the top end by the head. The rest of the shaft has no thread. And as you can already see, I've put the decals on this so that you can see what they are, and I'll just happen to have 4 I made earlier, or 3 I made earlier, ready to go. So that completes step 36. Steps 37 and 38 are installing the wheels onto the chassis, starting with the rears. All the wheels and tyres are exactly the same size in diameter and thickness, width, so you can just choose a wheel willy-nilly, install it onto the 12mm wheel adapter, and then we get the wheel cap, and it slides on, screws on nice and smoothly, and it does say do not over tighten, so that's just started to nip up, so I think I'll try it there for now. There we have one completed rolling chassis. Just let me zoom out a bit for you. One completed rolling chassis, all ready to go. Just needs a driver and a body shell now. And with that, that completes the 4th part of my video build series on the Tamiya 2011 Avante. I hope you've enjoyed watching, and I hope you join me for the next one, which will be painting the driver figure and completing the body shell and installing all those bits that you need to install afterwards. Thanks for watching. Bye.